And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 170. That's all looking a little slightly crooked. Let's just straighten that. Um, Today we're going to be talking about slow shutter speed and whether you can use the effects of that during the daytime. So do stick around, and if you if you happen to be watching live, then please leave a comment. Let me know where you are. Let me know what the weather's doing. Say hi, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a bit squeaky.
Oh no!
Not super squeaky.
But a bit squeaky.
But a bit.
Okay, apparently I have the squeaky voice back. Oh, bear with me just one moment. I'm just going to try something very quickly. I will go mute for a moment. Now, how's that sounding?
I want to see, but it's speeded up. It's a wee bit fast.
Yeah, has it? I've just changed it.
Oh,
Has
right.
it? Oh, the great fun of yes, my wife next door telling me that oh, apparently I'm fine now. Okay, okay, let's try again. One of these days, I will get on top of the technology, but apparently not today. So yes, where were we? Here we are, live, as you can tell, because there's no way I would put that chunk out if this was pre-recorded. So here we are, live on YouTube. However, of course, the recorded version will still be going out if you want to rewind and have a laugh at that bit again. But whether you happen to be watching live or recording, then make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that kind of stuff, and click like as well. Do like the video, especially for the amount of entertainment you get from me with high squeaky voices. So yes, leave a comment, and oh yeah, I see we've got comments in already. Let's go to there. That might help ground me a little bit. Pat says, hi everybody, bright but nippy here in Minehead. April says, hello everyone from a mostly cloudy, chilly Long Island. Was away seeing family in 2 different states 2 weekends in a row. All right, well, good to have you back, April. Janet says, hi from an overcast Mrs. Alga. And oh, she also wants to know, when do the clocks change in the UK, as I think it's different in the UK versus Ontario. That's a good point. The clocks change in the UK on the last weekend of the month. Okay, so what are we on now? So in 2 weeks' time, the clocks here in the UK will be going back. Now, if you happen to be in North America and it happens next week rather than 2 weeks' time, then, well, just do check. Locally Google before you just go time difference between UK and wherever you happen to be, and just kind of work out the hours, just in case we happen to be an hour earlier or later next week until we've kind of reset up again. So good point there, Janet. Mountain says, hi everyone from a sunny but chilly Colorado. Maggie says, hello from a bright and sunny chilly CD. Yes, I mean, it is a bright day today. It's definitely got a bit cooler. Touch of frost this morning. Weather forecast from around the world. Pat says, spring forward, fall back. Oh, that's of course which way the clocks go forward, whether you're going forward or back. They will be going back an hour this year, this month. Sandra says, hello everyone from a lovely sunny Birmingham. April says, all the audio's in fast speed and then sounds better. Okay, so that's catching up. I'm glad I got that one sorted out. Nadia joins us from Fife and says, hello everyone. John says, hello from Ohio. Fall has arrived. Rosemary says, good morning from the foggy state of Washington. Meg says, hello everyone. And Janet says, I think we're the first weekend in November that you change. Okay. Right. So I will remind you probably next week, if I remember, that the clocks will be going back in 2 weeks' time here in the UK. So there might be a little bit of overlap and juggling around for a week or two, and then hopefully we should all kind of resync again, at least until spring. And then we can go through it all again. Right, what else have I got? Oh, I've got a nice little error from YouTube saying YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience buffering. Not a huge amount I can do with that today either. Right, where are we at? And update on the sciatica. Yeah, I'm still a bit sore. I'm still having to lean forward in my chair a little bit. So hoping that I will be able to get through the next hour or so without worrying too much. about that. Yes, I've had coffee, I've had painkillers. Hopefully we'll be all right. So what are we going to do? Thank you everybody for turning up and sticking with me so far. Right, so what we're going to do then is I'm going to be talking about slow shutter speed. And we know, but I'll tell you what, let's move into it first of all, because this has been started from a picture put in by Quinton from South Africa. And Quinton, let me just find the photo for you. Let me swap that over to there and send, and no, I don't want that there. I want that over there. And then hopefully, yay, there we go. We get this picture here. And Quinton said, this is Mountfield National Park in Tasmania, Horseshoe Falls. Thinking of entering it into a national competition. Experimented with slow shutter speed. So he's at an f6.3, shutter speed of 1/13th of a second and an ISO 150. Not a lot of sun to work with, suggestions and recommendations. So this kind of kick-started the whole process of what he's done here is he's using a slower shutter speed, which is giving us, rather than the water being grabbed into hard, fast little detail where you can see all little droplets, it's starting to merge and blur together. Now, if you're trying to do this in daytime, you can only really do it if it's in low light conditions, because you need to have a slow shutter speed. So what I thought I would do is talk in more depth about slow shutter speed and how you might get the effects of it during daytime. It's much easier to do at night, but sometimes you can manage it in the day if you don't have too strong a light. Although even then there's ways around that, and I will come to that. But just a little bit of feedback first of all on for Quinton on this in terms of the picture. And I think the picture itself in terms of composition, I mean, first of all, I mean, yeah, it's a lovely set. You've got the water coming down, the lovely greenery, lots of texture, the smooth texture of the water against the kind of more detailed texture of the ferns, I think is, you know, has got a lot going for it. Nice colours, nice tones. Where I would say there is a potential difficulty with this, though, is where is your kind of focal point? Where's the focus point of where does your eye get drawn to, really, is what this is about. And what happens is we've got the water coming down here, and then we have other water coming down here. And that creates a kind of like a barrier, like, you know, we've got a cup here. And what you're kind of expecting then when you've got a cup shape is to have something in the cup. So if you actually had something in here, that was really grabbing the attention. So this is the point where you have your exotic animal or your person or your child playing, splashing water, or a bucket being lowered down, or an interesting shaped log or something. Instead, all we have within here is some nice ferns. Now those ferns are nice enough, they're a nice little splash of colour, but that's background texture, is not a focal point. And I think this is kind of part of the problem here, is that there isn't really... Now, if you had a single flow, so you had a waterfall and it was coming down and then it kind of flowed down over this bit here and then over the, you know, then you kind of, you've got a line where your eye travels through the photo. But because of this, that's a bit of interest over here, and that's a bit of interest over here, but the eye gets pulled in both directions. So the pale part, the water comes down here, the water comes down here, it joins, and it, like I said, creates this cup, this U shape. And at that point, the eye naturally wants to know what's here. Because there's nothing there, it's slightly disappointed. So although it's an interesting photo, although I think there's great texture, there's great light, there's great use of the slower shutter speed, I think ultimately where it doesn't fully deliver is in giving us a primary narrative, a primary point in the photo for us to look at and then feel that little bit more satisfaction. So if you are thinking about putting this into some kind of national competition, I would be aware of that, that might kind of work against you. I would look around. I don't know what other photos you took, whether you were able to go to the left or the right or anything else. What I want to do is I'll tell you what I will do is I will just briefly show you an idea not massively dissimilar but a slightly different. This was a photo I did a while back, a few years back, where we've got the same kind of idea. Now this isn't in Tasmania. This is in Scotland during autumn. And what we have here is we've got the water, and the water kind of, this is where our attention is drawn straight away. Actually what's happening here is this tree is sort of causing a barrier. We've got the ground is causing a kind of outer edges as such. So our eye gets drawn to here, and then it kind of follows through down the diagonal through the photo. But primarily we get drawn to this part here where the water is coming down. And then because it's got that soft, creamy, long exposure effect, it tends to feel like, oh, that's exactly what we're looking at. And these two are next to each other in the whole scale of the thing, so it doesn't feel like our eye is being pulled right from one side of the photo to the other side of the photo as yours is. I'm not saying this is the perfect photo, but I'm thinking that generally speaking, this kind of composition is slightly more satisfying. Because your main problem, as I say, is with this one, is your eye is just getting pulled in both directions. So that's what I wanted to say in terms of your kind of composition. Couple of comments here. What have we got? Right. Okay. Oh, we've got Drishti Bandhu. Watching for the first time. I'm Pete Hayward, though. Oh, not Drishti. Okay, Drishti borrowed my laptop recently. Must still be logged in. Okay. Oh, from a sunny Kilmarnock. Okay. Hi, Peter. I'll try and remember that you're not Drishti. You're Peter. Welcome. Glad you could join us. Pat says, looks very good to me. April says, has a painting look. I like that. Rosemary's, oh, you're going to have a few people welcoming you here, Peter. A friendly bunch, they really are. What else have we got? Oh, Sandra Light says, beautiful autumn, lovely autumn waterfall. And April says, both pieces have a kind of painting look, which I like. Okay, so what I really want to move on to now, though, is this notion primarily then of slow shutter speed and the different effects you get with a slow shutter speed as opposed to a fast shutter speed. Now, what do I really mean by slow and fast shutter speed? So we have our camera, and assuming that you've decided that you're either going to use the manual or semi-automatic settings, or you've got some kind of form of override, what happens is when we go click, we open up the lens, the light comes through, hits the sensor at the back. Now, the shutter speed affects how long that is open for. Okay, so the longer the shutter speed is open for, the more light comes in. The other commonly used part of this is the aperture, and the aperture is how wide it is. And probably the best analogy I can come across is, imagine you've got a waterfall coming down, you've just got water pouring down, and you've got a bottle, okay, and you want to fill the bottle. Now, if you have a wide aperture, imagine then that what you've got is you've got a wide neck. And the wider the neck, if you stick it under a waterfall, the quicker it's going to fill up. The narrower the neck, the longer it's going to take to fill up. Okay, because a wide neck's going to let a lot more water in the same amount of time. Now, your shutter speed is the equivalent of how long you hold your bottle under the water. Okay, so if you hold it under for a long time, longer, it will fill quicker, or rather, you've got to. If you don't hold it under for long enough, it's not going to fill. Now, depending on how wide your aperture is, depending on the force of the water, how long have you got to hold it under there to get to fill the bottle? Now, if there's not enough light, if say the waterfall's kind of just dripping because it's a dark day, it's a dull day, there's not enough light coming in, you've got to hold it under there for longer to fill the bottle. So you need a slower shutter speed to fill the bottle. So like the light coming in and hitting your lens, on a dull day, there's not as much light. On a bright sunny day, there's a lot more light. So when there's a lot of light, you don't need to have your shutter open for very long before you've had more than enough light hit your sensor. And if you have it open for too long, it whites out. Okay? So you can control this primarily through aperture and shutter speed, and then there's ISO. Another aspect to it, we won't worry. I've talked about ISO and other things. For the moment, though, what I'm really talking about is shutter speed and aperture tend to be your primary things that are working on. ISO, okay, that's ISO in this analogy is the equivalent of, like, supposing you want pure water going in, you don't want gunk coming down your waterfall. ISO is a bit like having a mesh over the top, and the tighter the mesh, so the smaller the ISO, the lower number the ISO, the tighter the mesh, the more pure the water's going to be, but the longer it takes to fill your bottle. So you get purer water, but it takes longer. If you have a low ISO with a big mesh, the water gets through quicker, but it's maybe you're going to get some of the gunk in as well. So the quality isn't going to be as good. So I don't know whether those three kind of analogies kind of hold together, but it hopefully gives some of you a bit of an idea. So this is what we're going to be exploring then when we come onto the idea of slow shutter speed. So actually, let's just show you, because Quinton actually sent another photo he put into the group where he went in completely the opposite direction. He used a very, very fast shutter speed. And let me show you this. So this was this fantastic wave shot. And this was shot at a very high shutter speed. This was shot at about 1,000th of a second or something like that, I think it was. And what it's done here, in complete opposition to the waterfall shot, is it's frozen the wave in complete movement. And you can see every single droplet is frozen in its space. Compositionally, it's much more pleasing because actually the curve of the wave draws your eye. Your eye gets drawn right, and then we've got darker on the outside, we've got paler in the middle. He's edited it quite nicely to kind of vignette around the edges. We've got this line of the froth of the wave coming here, the crash over there. So it's a very nicely composed photo. But this notion of fast shutter speed is freezing everything in space. So essentially what's happening then, let's say you've got, as you can see this screen, if I move my hand across the screen from there to there. Now, if I'm moving it at this speed, and you were to click at 100th of a second, right? Say it takes a second for me to move across here, and you click at 100th of a second, then that will freeze my hand at 100th of the space between here and there. So in 100th of that space, I can't have moved very far, so my hand will be quite steady. However, if your shutter speed is 1 second, then in the space of that second being open, my hand will have moved across the whole screen. And so it will have blurred, it will have smeared, it might not even register at all. So the slower your shutter speed, the more things blur. Okay? So sometimes, quite often when we're out there, we're trying to get a faster shutter speed. We're trying to capture a horse running or somebody moving or a car driving past. And so we use a shutter speed to try and capture the action so we're not having a blur. But sometimes we actually want to expressly have that blur. And if we go back to the likes of something like this photo, then what happens is we want the blur, but we only want the water to blur. We don't want all the ground to blur. Okay, so what we do is we stick the camera on a tripod or on a beanbag. We make sure the camera's really, really steady so that for the duration of half a second, a full second, 20 seconds, however long we can do it for, the rest of everything else, the tree, the rocks and everything else, they've not moved. Only the water has moved. And so it's only the water that gives us the blur. Now, I think to try, sometimes then you can play around with it. So you've seen this picture then. Okay, so that gives you an example. Another example of where you might do this is, I was going to show something here. Yeah, here's another kind of wee waterfall. This was a 1 second exposure, actually done on my phone. So you can see the water is just starting to stream down, and we've got this kind of nice frothy element here. I did a set of photos of a dancer, ballerina, and what we did was we set this to 1/3 of a second, and she moved around and she was kicking her legs up and moving a cloth about. And in that 1/3 of a second, you can see, so this foot didn't really move, so it's quite sharp, but her whole body did, and we got these wonderful kind of smears. Here's another one where she kicked her leg up. Again, this leg, relatively steady. Her arm is moving much more up here, but her leg has moved quite a lot, and her leg has more or less vanished in that third of a second. It's not registered so much. And her hand here, which moves slightly, means that the background is showing through. It's kind of ghost-like quality to it. Here she's starting to swing her arms over. Her legs are very steady. Foot is nice and sharp. Arms are curving over. She's now swinging a piece of cloth, throwing the cloth over her head. And again, feet pretty steady, cloth kind of moving her upper body. And as you can see, so I think we had a lot of fun with this, you know, because the camera is on a tripod, the background is still really sharp. You know, you can even see the holes in the wood from previous things being stuck there. And it just allows for you to start getting abstract, to get that sort of soft movement into things. And I think it's really quite a fun effect to play around with. Sue Roberts joined us, says, howdy all from Texas. Sandra likes the wave shot, and April says, wow, nice. So you can see then that what happens is if you can keep the camera steady and just allow some parts to move, it opens up a whole world of creative possibility. Now, if we come back to this idea then of light, trying to get the right balance of light coming in order to get the effect. And what I did a little while back, I went to, I was on a dull day, and I found a tiny little stream, and I stuck my camera on a tripod and just zeroed in on a little bit of where water was running over a bit of a rock, and it was under the trees, so it was quite dark. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happened when I went from a very fast shutter speed to a very slow shutter speed. Now, for those of you who are into the technicals, I am going to talk about some of the technicals, but if you're not into the technicals, don't worry, don't get too hung up on the numbers. Just try and get a general sense of the idea of it. You can worry about the numbers afterwards. You can worry about the numbers when you actually play and experiment. You don't have to sort of write anything down here. But for anybody who does like the technicals, then what I've done here is I've scribbled them into the corner, although I realise that's not necessarily showing up so well. So what we've got here is we've got a few stones, a bit of moss around the back. We've got, and we've got this stream just trickling over the rocks. Now this was taking out 1/1000th of a second, okay? So 1/1000th of a second, the water hasn't had much chance to move within 1/1000th of a second. So it's pretty, you know, I'm catching little bubbles here, little droplets getting kind of caught in midair like that. You know, that in a course of a second, a 1/1000th of a second, it hasn't moved very far. This has this kind of, it looks almost solid, like a kind of a sheet, you know, like it could almost be ice or a sheet of bubbly glass or something. We know there's movement because we recognize that it's a stream, but actually it's frozen in that place. So 1/1000th of a second. Now, the 1/1000th of a second, to go back to our water bottle analogy, if you just shove the water bottle under the water and pulled it out very quickly, you're not necessarily going to get enough light in. So I've had to go for a very wide aperture, like a wide neck. And so I've got an f2.8, and even that wasn't enough. So I've had to whack up the ISO. I've had a really thin mesh, 6400. So the quality of this photo isn't that great. As I zoom in, it gets sort of out of focus. This is the JPEG version. It's been cleaned up a little bit, but it's noisy. It's not a great quality photo. At web size, it's fine. It's good enough for the purpose of what I'm trying to show. So what happens if I do slower than 1/1000th of a second? So this then, I've gone down to 640th of a second. Okay, so about a third of the speed slower. I'm still at f2.8, but I've not had to have such a high ISO to counterbalance that. So I'm now at an ISO 5000, okay? And what we can see is that the clarity, those little droplets are, it's starting to create a little, it's not a perfectly round sphere anymore. We're starting to get a little bit of elongation in those droplets. So what happens is, let's move on again then. So now I'm going to speed it up again. So now I go to 400th of a second. So again, I cut off about another third of where I was before. And I'm also at f2.8. ISO had been balanced out and down to 3200. The quality's slowly getting better. Not brilliant at this point, 400th of a second. And you can see it's starting to, stretch a little bit more. Go down to 250th of a second. Okay. And if you're looking here again, you're starting to see it smoothing out. ISO's getting better. Get down to 125th of a second, and you can start to see that it really is starting to smooth a little bit more. Okay. We go to 80th of a second, and it's definitely smoothing out more. 30th of a second. So 30th of a second is really getting much slower. Now at this point, this tends to be too slow to hand hold. So this is the point where you want to have your tripod. Now, either have a tripod or, another quick thing, just so I remember to put this here, beanbag. Some of you may remember, I've talked about this kind of thing before. You can buy these really, they're nice and squidgy. And what happens is you can stick them on a rock and it'll mold itself around it. And then you can stick your camera on top of it. And it molds itself to the camera as well. It really does keep the camera steady. So, beanbag on rock, camera on, obviously check things first so that it's not going to roll off, so that it's pretty secure. But these things are very cheap or easily made. I mean, you can make yourself a bag, fill it with split peas or lentils, will do exactly the same job. So very cheap, very, very handy if you don't want to carry a tripod around with you all the time. But the point is, you need to keep your camera steady. So 30th of a second, you're now kind of moving into that territory where you want to have. So what happens then if we go slower than that? So next one, now I've gone to 10th of a second, okay? And I'm now up to a 100 ISO. So that's as pure as I can get. I can't make it, I've got a kind of wide aperture, I've got a very thin mesh, I've got a good quality photo here. So everything now is, if I start letting in, as I start to let in more light, or because it's on a slow shutter speed, I've now got to start narrowing my aperture because I don't want too much light getting in. So now I've gone from a 2.8 to a 3.2. So what I'm starting to do is narrow the size of the bottle top. So it's like you're sticking your bottle under, you're holding under for a long time. So you put a thick mesh on it, a tiny, very tight mesh on it, and you have a narrower bottle top, and it's going to take longer to fill up. And because it's taking longer to fill up, we're getting this slow effect, this slow shutter speed effect. I hope this analogy is making sense. It makes perfect sense to me. I just hope it's translating somehow. Okay, so that's the 10th of a second. Now we go to a 1/4 of a second. We're definitely getting into creamier kind of territory here. F5, I've had to narrow the aperture a little bit more. 1/2 a second, so twice as long as the last one, is getting even more so. I've had to also go to an f7.1, so narrowing it again. A full second, okay, 1 second aperture. In a second, a droplet will have come down here, bounced across the water and come down here. So that whole smear is really getting soft here now. I've had to go to an f10. 2.5 seconds, f14. f14 getting a very narrow aperture here. And then finally, f22, which is as narrow as I can possibly get it. Okay, I can't get my, f22 is the limit of that particular lens. And at f22 and an ISO 100 under dull light conditions, I managed to get 6 seconds. That's as long as I could get. Okay, and that 6 seconds has allowed for this beautifully creamy, I mean, it's almost beyond cream. I mean, it's beyond water. We're starting to get almost into water vapor at this point. It's almost like cloud kind of drifting down. And if I could have got to, say, 15 seconds or 30 seconds, then it would have really been much more like vapor, like water vapor. And it would have been quite special. But that was as far as I could go with the conditions that I had. Now, had it been bright and sunny, I wouldn't have been able to get down as low as that because there would have still been too much light. So when you're trying to do something like this, a dull day is your friend. okay? And under the canopy of trees, even more so. You're trying to be in as lower light conditions as you can in order to be able to get your camera to have the shutter open as long as you want it. So I hope that kind of makes sense, gives you a sense of what's going on. Okay, a couple of questions or comments here. Nadia says, however, in landscape photography, it can be tricky as if it's windy because the foliage will also blur, not just the water in the waterfalls when using long exposure. This is very true. On a windy day, you are going to get, you're right, leaves are going to blow backward on the trees, are going to move. The question is then, is that an effect you want? If you don't want that effect, essentially you have to go out to your landscape on not only a dull day, but a day when it's not windy. Next says, I think the waterfall is really relaxing to look at, really nice. April says, I like the 1/10 look, starts to make a difference. And April also says, now I know why I see, I've got a little funny mark here. See the background looks, now I know why when I see the background is more dark. Not quite so. There's a funny little symbol stuck in front of one of the can't quite fully read your sentence. Okay, but what if you want to go, what if it's either a brighter day, sunnier day, or you want to go the full kind of 30 seconds, 60 seconds kind of thing? Well, at that point, what you need to do is you need to darken down the filter. You need to darken down even more. And at this point, now I don't have a lot of photos. This isn't a style of thing I tend to do. Because I'm a portrait photographer, I don't tend to use ND filters. However, I do have one here, right? Okay, so this is an ND filter, and essentially what it is it's dark, okay? And so let me just show you here what happens is, so if I, right, bright light, torch light. Now, I'm going to stick this here and put the torch. Now, you can actually see then that the light is much darker. Okay, so what we're doing here, this is the equivalent of having really thick sunglasses. Okay, so if you think about the whole purpose of sunglasses is to lessen the amount of light hitting your eyes. It's too bright, you're squinting, you stick your sunglasses on, it filters out some of the light. Okay, so this here is doing exactly that. So these things then, you get one that's going to fit the size of your lens. In this case, this is a 77mm width lens. This is a 77mm thing, and it means I can just screw that into there. And when I take my photo now, there's a lot less light coming in. Now, this is a 10-stop ND filter. It's about one of the thickest you can generally buy. And what it means is it's the equivalent of, instead of being at a 5,000th of a second, you can drop it down to something like about a 50th of a second. Or instead of having a really wide aperture, you can go down to it goes down to a narrow aperture. It's the equivalent of. So it's the equivalent of kind of like about 10 stops of movement, either adjusting your aperture or adjusting your ISO or adjusting your shutter speed. So it gives you more to play with. Okay, so it's only any good if you are, sorry, it also makes quite a lot of noise. So it's only any good if you are wanting specifically to do slow shutter speed photography. Otherwise, if you want to do fast shutter speed photography, obviously you're shooting yourself in the foot somewhat with that. So the idea then, you get yourself an ND filter. They come in all shapes, sizes. Make sure you get one that's going to fit the lens that you're going to be using. Prices, I mean, anything, depending on the quality of the ones you're making, anything from sort of about 30, 40 pounds or dollars upwards. Some are very, very expensive. Some have all sorts of extra coatings and filters and what have you on them. So that then is another way that you can slow down. And if I had something like that on, when I did that thing, I could have probably easily gone to, instead of 6 seconds, I could have easily had a 60-second exposure, in which case I would have had that absolute water vapor feel to it, where you would have practically seen the rocks underneath through a kind of slight haze. Couple of comments here. What else? Sandra says, good demo of the relationship between light, f-stop and ISO. April says, meaning there is no sun. Okay, dark looking woods or forest. Yeah. Okay, and Nadia says, okay, well, Nadia and April are busy chatting to each other, I think. So, excuse me. Really then, so that's kind of what I'm hoping gives you an idea of that notion of slow shutter speed and where you can kind of really have some fun with it. So it's all about light and the amount of light getting into your camera. Okay. Excuse me. And there's a number of things you can do with, so you saw like when I was doing the dancer earlier, you don't just have to worry about waterfalls. You can play with people moving. You can, if you're doing a street scenes can be really fun as well. Set your camera on a tripod where nobody's particularly bothered. Set up your street scene. Take your photo, but have a really long exposure. Maybe you need to have an ND filter. And what you will find is if you take a photo across, say, a 30-second photo, then there will be one or two people that will be still in the same place after 30 seconds. Maybe they're just checking their phone. Maybe they're sitting down. Maybe they're lost in thought. And there will be slight smears of people who in 30 seconds have travelled quite a long way across the pavement or sidewalk or across the road. You might have traffic that's moved. Traffic that's partly stuck at traffic lights and then started moving on. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in nature and waterfalls to get this. Street scenes you can do some really interesting stuff with too. Another fun one, again, if you do something like you get your beanbag, is stick your beanbag on the dashboard, the kind of parcel shelf of your car, and then set a kind of, and then your car sits, and then I quite liked this one. You get very, very abstract here. This was a 10-second exposure. 10-second exposure. So dusk was just starting to come in. It was getting dark. I've got f22, so I've got it again a narrower aperture as I possibly can at 100 ISO, and 10 seconds. So I set the timer for 10 seconds exposure, and then I started driving. When I was sort of paused, just ready to go, I click, and then sort of started driving. And so you can start to see some of the houses in the street. You can see some of the trees coming down here, but the car is also moving and bouncing, and there's other light cars coming up and down the road, and you get really, really abstract, and you can have a lot of fun with that. And if you're sort of just driving somewhere, obviously safety when driving first, don't be taking your eyes off the road. But if you've got a reasonable setup, or even better, if you've got somebody else driving, that's really what I should be saying. If somebody else is driving, you play around with your camera from the passenger side, okay? Sit your camera there and then do 10-second exposures and stuff like that as you're driving along. And as the scenery changes, as the cars in front change, especially if it's sort of getting a bit darker, they've got the car headlights on, you can get some fantastically interesting, abstract kind of ideas. Have I got anything else here? This was another one from the same shoot where, as you can see, I'm kind of going around a corner, cars turning off that way, cars moving around here. Again, just lovely lines and shapes. So that notion of that kind of long exposure in order to get interesting shapes, I think, is a whole fun area of photography which to explore. And like I said, if you want to go slow shutter speed during the day, but you don't have an ND filter, but then go for a dull day, go for dusk, go for just after sunset, or just really overcast days, and play. I mean, I really would urge you to go out and play, because you do photography. If you didn't, you wouldn't be watching this. Well, having said that, I know there's a couple of people, Pat, my wife, but most of you are photographers. And part of the fun of photography is that this camera, this allows you to see the world in a way that we don't with our normal eyes. Our brains interpret a scene in front of us. As soon as we decide to crop this edit, we decide to zero in on this place, we just, certainly when we decide to play around with the shutter speed, we see the world in a way that we don't with our normal eyes. So I think there's a huge amount of fun to be had there. And what else have we got here? April says, okay, another thing on my bucket list, get one of the personal Photoshop lessons in person. Yeah, well, I mean, well, yes, you can. Oh, right, they're talking about merging Photoshop. Okay, so that's still April and Nadia chatting away. And Meg says, are you going to do a slow shutter speed challenge? I did consider it. I now, when I last talked about slow shutter speed, I did do a slow shutter speed challenge. This time I didn't think I would. I just thought I'll outline it at the moment. Right, so hopefully then that gives you an idea of what you can do, what you can play around with. Little reminder, if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, then do please consider supporting them with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. And of course, don't forget to invite your friends along as well. Make sure you subscribe, ask your friends to subscribe, and click the notification bell. So next week I'm going to be doing a feedback session only. So this is your chance to send me your images. What images do you have? Are you feeling that you've kind of got a sticking point with? Photos where you've done something, you feel it could be better, or it's not working the way you want to, and it could be anything to do with photography. It can be anything to do with the composition, to do with the lighting, to do with the editing, to do with the camera settings. Anywhere that you've got photos where you go, I could do with a little bit of personal help on this photo. We can look up all sorts of other pictures and websites and stuff to get general information, but to get personal feedback on your own photo, this is your opportunity. So if you would like personal photo feedback on your photo, then send it to me, either kim@kimayres.co.uk, email me directly, or we also have the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and put your photo in there. Tell me what your sticking point is, tell me what kind of feedback you would like, and I will do my best to help. Or if you have any particular questions about photography in general that you would like, then I would, let me know that as well. So that's next week then. I don't think that any clocks will have changed wherever, but do check your own thing. But certainly in 2 weeks' time, the clocks will be going back here in the UK. So just double check, Google the time on that. So that brings us to an end. Thank you very much to Quinton for sending in that photo and setting off the whole idea of slow shutter speed in the first place. Thank you to everybody who's been chatting away and asking questions and what have you. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.